I'm going to say a warm welcome from us guys to our webinar on SA Smart City Revolution. As I'm sitting here today, we are stage 4 load shedding. My own power never came back after load shedding was supposed to end over an hour ago. So although I love the notion and idea of a smart city and really what it can do for an economy, how can we really achieve this when we cannot get basic services right? So I'm really excited about today's discussion to discuss these kind of issues and how we can really just do better in our economy. I'm now going to hand over to Daniel Roberts, our host and moderator for today's session.
Good morning, Carrie, Rian, and Kevin. I'm going to introduce you now to all of our attendees. Thanks for joining us. It's really a hot topic, and it's one that we approached with trepidation exactly for this because of where we are in load shedding. If there's ever a time that South Africa needs smart cities, it's right now. More important, we need smart leadership and we need a smart road forward that we can follow. And therefore, we've chosen two panelists, Rian Graham and Kevin Govender, who I'm going to introduce now, as they can shine a light just on where we could go, and hopefully we can spark some interest and some hope. So today could be a motivational session because life rocks if you let it. That's what I say. And even when you're down, you have a choice. So let's think about smart cities and urbanization. And, you know, when we were in preparation for this, my thought was smart city. I'm thinking of Singapore. I'm thinking of when I was in Norway and Oslo, and you've got Wi-Fi everywhere, and that's just scratching the surface. That's really the lipstick and paint. When we think about the urbanization, which the mass urbanization that's taking place at the moment, because people are moving from farms to cities, it's not slowing down for anybody. 50% of the world's population was living in cities by 2008. By 2040, this is going to be at a staggering 65%. In 1974, when I was born, that was a long, long time ago, there were 3 megacities. A megacity is defined by smart cities is 10 million people or more. That was New York, Tokyo, and Mexico City. And we used to see drawings of kids not being able to see the sky in Mexico City. It was gray. Today, there are over 21 megacities worldwide and 29 expected by 2025. That is quite a scary number. Can you imagine if the lights are out across all of those? There are already more than 500 cities with more than 1 million inhabitants around the world. And Africa's numbers are just increasing. If we think about the sprawl that's happening within our sister nations in SADC, I don't know when last you went for a meeting in Kenya and tried to get anywhere when the rain hits. It's not a pretty sight, lest we speak about the Copacabana of Africa, Lagos. And Johannesburg is no different. The challenges are there. It's open and it's wide for technology. So who have we got chatting to you that's been sitting there allowing me just to introduce this topic and this debate? First of all, we've got Rian Graham. Rian has joined us from a strong broadband wireless background. He's been in this field for about 21 years with an in-depth knowledge of technology. He joins us from CommScope. He's leading this area, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know Rian even more. And then we've got Kevin from Deloitte, or an author. You're a Deloitte man. Hey, who is an author? That was a segue in. Kevin's just published his first book. It is out. We're going to be giving it a punt a little bit later. But he is a business enterprise architect and strategist with experience providing business strategy and exactly what we're talking about, giving the roadmap. Currently, he leads the SAP, Oracle, and emerging ERP solutions at Deloitte within the enterprise technology and performance portfolio. I'm really privileged to have both of these gentlemen on our panel today. And as usual, we've got the attendees. The attendees shouldn't be shy. I know George is on here. Use the chat, but if you've got a question for us regarding smart cities, just for my own brain, because it works linear, go in the Q&A and smash it in there so that we can see where your questions are coming from. Kevin, as an author, The Rise of the Sharing Economy, you've dived into smart cities already. And I want to ask you right off the bat, before we get CommScope in, what is a smart city as defined by you, Kevin?
Okay, good morning, everyone. And thank you, Daniel, for that introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to be part of the panel. So I think the first thing is, we all talk about cities. We know, as Daniel has mentioned, there's an influx of people moving from rural areas into the urban areas. So what we're finding is the population, the density of cities is just expanding out of control. And as you know, we have limited resources, whether it's electricity, whether it's water, roads, buildings, capacity, all these things that the demand is just starting to increase. So part of this is the whole thing is about how do you use technology and innovation to make a city that is once existing, that has different components, and I'll go into that in my next as to what constitutes a smart city. How do you make it smarter? How do you take these and get real-time information out of this so you can make good decisions in real time that actually makes the life of the citizen better, more efficient, more productive, and more effective? And I think that's what it's about. It's use of technology. And remember, these things coexist, right? It's about the consumer's life and how do you bring this together? So that's the one component.
Okay, pause there. Rian, we've got Kevin who's just dived in there. How does CommScope complement exactly what Rian's been saying there, or where do you diverge from there?
Right. So what we do is we obviously play in the technology sphere, right? And when we look at a smart city, it's not built up of any one type of technology, right? It is a myriad of different technologies that need to come together in a single visible infrastructure base that can give the council or the city good visibility as to what is happening, be it from, let's say, waste management, water, utilities, traffic control and management, environmental management. So in other words, look at air pollution, etc. So as you can imagine, there is a number of technologies involved in such a large system. And I think the key difference to the way we used to do it and the way we need to do it going forward in a smart city environment is developing a technology set that creates a single platform for multiple technologies to be able to communicate across each other so that you can get a collective view of what is happening from a macro perspective in the city. And then you can break it down into different verticals, if I can call it that, right? How do we improve our water supply to the city? Where are there currently traffic infrastructure challenges? This can only be done by real-time data and analyzing the data and projecting what we are seeing that's going to happen in the future so that we can be more proactive in delivering these services to the residents of a smart city. And then obviously something that's very critical is at the end of the day, it's a public-private partnership. And what needs to happen is it's driving cost effectiveness in the metro or in the city itself, right? How can we do things better, smarter, quicker, but more cost effectively as well?
So if I summarize what you've made on the first point, I'm coming back to you now, Kevin. It's a myriad of technologies blending together to enhance the citizen experience.
100%.
So a smart city has got the citizen at the center. Kevin, you wanted to carry on there. Go for it.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is, and I think Rian just summed it up, right? We talk about public transportation, IT connectivity, water management, power supplies, sanitation, waste management, urban e-governance, in terms of governance services that you render for the citizen and the citizen participation. And maybe just touch on one of them before I go into the building blocks, right? I think the one thing for me today is power management, right? The fact is, if you look at your DB box at home, your power box, you either got a single phase or a 3-phase box. And some of them, you'll see that there's actually something there that allows the municipalities to take control of your electricity at home. So with smart meters, and that's where the world is going, right? And that's what I know South Africa is looking at that. It is about how they identify areas of large consumption that is putting a physical strain on the power network, and they can go and switch that off in your house without your permission. And that is about some technology and innovation that allows that to happen. Now think about it. Take the same logic and apply it to anything. For example, there's too much cars on the road and they know that the robot takes 10 seconds to change. They could change that and say, let's change it. If in one particular area, there's more cars, they could change that robot to change every 5 seconds. I'm just giving a hypothetical example. So that's the power of technology. But how does this happen? And I think I'm going to talk now about what we term as Deloitte, the 5 primary layers of dimensions within a smart city. So the first one, we talk about infrastructure. And infrastructure is divided into 2 things: hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure. The hard infrastructure, we're talking about the buildings and the space, parking space, for example. If you go into the city, sometimes how long does it take you to find a parking? Now you imagine you're driving, you're connected, and you put in and say, I'm looking for a space, I need to go to Checkers, nearest parking place. That's what happens, right? You can have that ability to do that. So we talk about transport and utility networks. What transport, and remember the transport, we're talking about private transport, public transport, the Ubers of the world. And now, I'm not sure if you know Didi. Didi is a Chinese-based company that's come in to compete with Uber. It used to be called Taxify. They bought off Taxify. So it's ride sharing and competing directly with Uber in South Africa at the moment.
So just pause there, Kevin. There was a comment in the chat which actually, again, sums it up again. It's the users, which is the council in provision of services and the citizen in receipt of services. And I love the fact that you're talking about the user experience on Didi or Uber and tying into traffic management, because I've seen you talk about in the prep, we cheated for all the attendees and we did a bit of prep between Rian and Kevin. And, you know, the smart cities around the world are actually taking slices of the experience and smartening that up. So we don't have to say, oh, we can't get it because we'll never be able to do it because of X, Y, and Z. We've got traffic management, connected vehicle infrastructure, smart mobility living lab in London, making transport safer in Paris. So if we're breaking it down like you're talking around the Deloitte's 5 areas here, we can imagine these can be drives for people like Rian and our committees. Hey? We don't, it's definitely not all or nothing. It's not dumb and then smart. Rian, are you taking them on like Kevin's talking?
Yeah, Dan. So I think the one thing we need to state very clearly is that a smart city, you're not a dumb city, if I can call it that, and the next day you're a smart city, right? It is a long evolutionary process, right? And in essence, you should see it as a living organism almost, right? It is continuously growing and expanding and adjusting and changing. So that would mean if we start with a smart city initiative today, it is a long process, right? We might start off with a simplistic, application that helps the citizen to understand traffic challenges on the N1, for instance, right? A way to communicate to the people. So that's only the first step, right? That will feed into your public service sector. So in other words, all of your bus services, your train services that connects into that. What I'm trying to say is that you should see a smart city as an evolutionary process and an almost never stopping changing environment.
Okay.
That is what you should see. You can't start off, and again, I think the biggest challenges we've got in Africa is, if we go back in history, none of the cities were in essence designed and developed to become smart cities, right? So we have a challenge in that the existing infrastructure there is not necessarily designed and built to cater for the mass urbanization that's coming into these areas, like in Joburg, if you look at Kenya, if you look at Lagos, all of these cities, they were traditionally old colonized cities, built up in the late 1800s, beginning of the century, the 1900s, and now all of a sudden we have to build out on that, right? So there's a number of technologies and challenges to fix in this process. So I think the key issue I want to raise here is that there's not a flick of a switch in your smart city.
So before I get back to, because I really want to circle back to where Kevin's been layering it on hard infrastructure, soft, we've got a couple of very good questions coming in, and Jonathan Lovehold put through a comment and a question where the concept of a smart city would not be possible without ubiquitous broadband telco. Reliability of connectivity is critical to a smart city. That's long. Okay, his question is, what is the best way to minimize network connectivity issues? Rian, I think that falls into your wheelhouse.
Yeah, okay. So the best way to look at this is smart cities weren't possible 10 years ago because of the cost component and the lack of the actual ICT technology set, right? Today, you've got a number of technologies. So the first thing in my mind that is needed in a city environment is fiber as far as possible, right? Now, we are seeing a huge explosion of fiber deployments throughout South Africa in the urban areas, in the suburb areas. That's happening in Africa as well. So your first criticality is you need to have a proper high-speed backbone, and that is typically serviced by fiber. However, in certain areas, fiber, you simply can't fiber. So this is where the combination or the marriage of different technologies come into play. For instance, the introduction of 5G becomes critical. Why is 5G important? Because we now have zero latency communication, right? So we've got less than 1 millisecond connection speeds. We've got high capacity. So we can transfer video footage across a 5G network in the same manner as we would traditionally do that on a fiber infrastructure. If we go a step further than that, on the edge of this environment, you will have a lot of sensors, IoT technology.
But
right?
just pause there, because the next question is security is a major concern as IoT and sensor technology use expands. So does the threat level to security. How do we blend security in here? How do we handle a security issue? Thank you, Davi Nordia. You made me sound clever, but it's actually his question.
100%.
So do you want to carry on with that? Or I actually wanted Kevin to comment on that one as well.
Okay. Let me just very quickly do the dimensions, because I think that brings it into it, right? So I'm going to take the dimensions and do it a different way rather than the way I've been doing it. So the first one is, remember, we talk about goals, aspirations, and quality of life. And within goals, aspiration, and quality life, as Deloitte, we've identified 6 different areas. One is the power of choice, independence, safety, wealth, sustainability, and opportunity. Okay? That is what people are looking for, and that's what we aspire in our life. We want that flexibility, independence. So the next level is saying, in order to be able to create those outcomes, you need people. But there's 4 categories of people. There's the innovators, those people that come up and are the designers and the architects, which we call the innovators. There is the citizens, who are the people that reside in this smart city. There's the visitors that come to visit, and there's the employers that actually make this work. Then we look at the ecosystem. The ecosystem is divided into both public sector, third sector, private sector, and community. Public sector is schools, emergency services, councils. Third sector, we look at charities, non-profit, social enterprises. Then we look at the private sector, which is the employers, the retailers, the small, medium enterprises. And then we look at the community, the culture, the family, all those things. Then we talk about, we got those things. Now we're saying is, how do we create this? So it's all about interconnected city systems. It's taking all the systems that represent these different fragments and bringing together. So you've got transportation systems. Gauteng, the Gautrain, is a brilliant example of creating one element of smart transport in South Africa. You got an app. I know if I'm need a flight, what time I need to leave. I know which train station. I can do all that from my app. I know what time to get there. I know what time the train's going to leave. I know what time the train's going to arrive. That's smart. Now, how do you take what we created in Gautrain and do it in electricity and water and all the other priority things? So we talk about the interconnected city systems, as I said, transportation. I gave you an example. We talk about health services. You know, today, with all the challenges we're having with COVID, getting an ambulance to a person's house who's battling to breathe is a nightmare. There's challenges in terms of ambulance. There's shortages of ambulance services. There's social care. There's the economy itself. We talk about the city administration. We talk about power. We talk about water. We talk about energy services, disaster management. I mean, about 2-3 months ago, we had a social unrest in South Africa. Disaster management was a major issue that we couldn't. There was some intel, but our intelligence department was not proactive enough to be able to understand the severity of this problem and how put up emergency response plan to do things. And you saw the chaos that transpired. Now, getting back to the last one, interconnectivity, and then we spoke infrastructure. Spoke about hard buildings, transport, innovation, and communication networks is the critical component. And then we talk about the soft part, and I'm almost done, the governance, the legislation, the community organizations, and the innovation forums, like the 4th Industrial Revolution of South Africa. Those are important. There's a public paper on that. to say, how do we use the power of the technology and innovation in the country to take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution and the technology? And the question links back to, the thing is, everything is about data that is available out there that can be hacked. So cybersecurity, the POPI Act that's coming now, the protection and personal information, all these things are important things. So it's not fragmented. You need to somehow, an architect that brings everything together and says, and I think, Rian, you made a good point. This is not something today we are, for a better word, not a smart city, and tomorrow we are a smart city. There's a plan, there's an evolution.
Rian, in the chat, we can see there's lots of opinions on here. People know what smart cities are. People are putting in their comments. Kevin has spoken about the building blocks and the intersection, what Deloitte does, and layers over these industry maps of the different stakeholders. If we know this stuff, why are we not doing it?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that traditionally, if we look at a council, a large council, right? Let's take a metro like City of Johannesburg, for example. Traditionally, the way they've been built from the ground up was in silos, right? So you would have the wastewater management. They would have their whole infrastructure and support and maintenance divisions. They will have their own ICT system that runs that division or that vertical. And you would have the same with traffic management, with police services, et cetera, et cetera. And over time, what has happened is everyone's been building their own silos and their own technologies in isolation of sharing that information, on a macro scale. The minute you start sharing, so in other words, what we are saying is that, guys, you need to take a step back, and you should not have individual budgets per vertical per se, but we should work from a macro scale and then divide it back into a micro scale. So in other words,
so now we understand the technology is not the inhibitor. CommScope's got this. Deloitte's got consulting around it. We're talking around the politics, which is an inhibitor. So, Rian, if we accept that the things we can change, the other things we have to vote for and get those changes through, it's a bigger engine. What do you do then? Do you look at suburbs? Do you look at smart centers? How do you see Johannesburg taking this on? Cape Town, Bloemfontein? What is our South African strategy that we can change what we can change to enable this?
Yeah, okay. So again, what we would do there is typically, how do you eat an elephant? Because this is a massive elephant we need to eat, right? You need to do it bit by bit. So you would typically start off at the base layer, introduce it into environments, for instance, where it allows itself to introduce the technology sets on a much rapid deployment base rather than in areas where it doesn't allow it. So for instance, let's take Waterfall as a good example. Brand new mass development, mixed use environment. That would be an ideal area to kind of build and test the model. And from there, you can start building it out to the larger areas. One thing I need to mention is that we need to understand that this is a public-private partnership from day one. So there needs to be political will to facilitate, the movement to a smart city. And the question is, why do you want to do this? Well, first of all, your councils, your metros need to become more efficient in delivering the services, right? We all know what the efficiencies currently are in the metros, right? So they have to become more efficient in delivering the services. Why? Because there's urbanization. There's just more people coming into these territories. They can't continue to do it the way they used to because it's not cost effective. It's costing them too much, which directly translates to excessive cost for the residents because they are effectively subsidizing the cost, right? So we're
paying for my background.
Well, 100%.
So let me bring Kevin in here. So it's not a technology inhibitor, Kevin. We understand that, but we've now got the technology. I like to think of the circle of influence and circle of concern. The circle of concern is behind me. The circle of influence is what can we do? So if I hone in and I ask Rian's question again, what is the Deloitte strategy for smartening up cities? Is there smart silos? I stole that from Terry. Is that smart silos, or is there smart suburbs, or is there smart solutions that we are looking at? How do we break Rian's elephant down in your mind? Give me a 3-step process to making Randburg smart.
Okay, so, let's take Lanseria, right? Deloitte is not involved in that, but I'll give you my opinion. So if you look from a South Africa perspective, there is some initiatives that are currently on the go to looking at making South Africa smarter. And some of those areas is Lanseria. If you look at Lanseria, the key focus is what they're talking about is urban sustainability. And as you know, sustainability is becoming a big component, right? Yeah. So the whole idea is they want to build a city around the Lanseria International Airport and make that the key feature. And what they want to do is, as you know, around the Lanseria area, there's large amount of land. So they want to bring in things like rainwater harvesting and solar energy. Those are the two areas. And part of that there is, as I said, linked to sustainability is about how do you limit the carbon footprint. So that's one example that's going to happen. Now, the thing is, I've mentioned the components you require. So if you look at what needs to happen is there needs to be collaboration between private sector, public sector, and the citizens, three-party coming together and being able to do this. And this is why, for example, Singapore is one of the leading countries because what they do very well, the government, the private sector, and the citizens, they come together and they have very clear defined where they want to go, what they want to do, plans that are structured in. Another example is Durban Aerotropolis. It sounds like one of these superheroes, from Superman areas. The whole Durban Aerotropolis, the aim is to become a premier business and trade hub in Southern Africa. And part of that is how do you turn the surface around the King Shaka International Airport into a smart city with diversified economic activities. And part of this is they want to boost the province's economy, right? The things that they're looking at is a freight-orientated development at its heart.
Yes.
They want to have a world-class cargo facility managed by a single handler. And you do know that there's a lot of emphasis happening on what they call the Dubai Trade Port Corporation around there. And it's purpose-built, right? And one of the key things they're doing is they're calling it greenfields. And part of this is how they plan. But the challenge is these are not going to happen in the next 2 years, 3 years, whatever. It's over 10 to 15 to 20 years. But the question, coming back to the question you asked me, what Rian said, you can't overnight make this happen. So you have to have a strategic plan, a long-term plan, but that long-term plan needs to be broken down into what are the most critical and priority areas now that you want to do in the next 2 to 3 years, in the next 3 to 5 years, in the next 5 to 10 years. So you keep building on these building blocks so you can actually create the smart city.
Rian, I think Terry and I are on the same soccer team here.
Yeah.
Can we achieve this dream? Can we have a smart Soweto, smart Deep Kloof, smart Deep Sloot? And, apartheid has been, our cities were built for 10% of the population, and now we've got this explosion. We've got people that are living so far from where they work. We've got people living in our green spaces. We've got an aging infrastructure that was not meant to deliver services to this amount of people. And we've got good intentions in lots of government areas. We can build new but can't maintain. How does CommScope see a way around that in the smart city evolution? Give me a 3-step process that you approach.
So what is critical? And the answer is yes. So we can definitely have a smart Soweto or a smart Deep Sloot, for instance, right? No doubt. What we need to have a look at is, first of all, your basic infrastructure, right? So the city or the metro needs to have the political will to introduce world-class sanitation services and water supply into those areas, right? We all know that the deep sloot is not going to go away. It's only going to grow bigger, right? So ignoring it is not going to address anything. So you have to make sure that you do urban planning to address the fact that it is undestined or it was an unplanned environment. We have to make that work. So that would be the base layer, like Kevin said, right? The raw infrastructure that you have to put down. Secondly, you need to make sure that you've got proper connectivity, be it fiber, be it 4G, 5G, be it broadband wireless access. There needs to be a number of technologies introduced in that area. Why? First of all, you've got to look at the amount of taxis that travel between Deep Kloof and the likes of Fourways, etc. So you need to make sure that you've got proper infrastructure, road infrastructure, to alleviate the traffic flow, congestion challenges, etc., etc. That can be done. Again, it's a case of political will. And I want to kind of add to Kevin's comment he made just before I answered. My belief is we cannot have this smart city initiative. We can't own it and drive it from local government perspective.
Okay.
The reason for that is we've got change of guard every 3-4 years, right? With local elections, one's coming up now, the 1st of November. If one party changes hands and they have to hand over to another party, there's different agendas at play here. My view is it needs to be done at national government level. It needs to be documented with a white paper. There needs to be structure in this so that regardless of who the local entity is that's running that specific metro for the next 3-4 years, they have to adhere to a national bigger plan.
Awesome. Rian, Jonathan popped a question and I said in the chat I'd get to it. He's got a long thing, preparing a strategy to achieve smart city project success, identifying areas. He's talking about operating the tools, tech expertise are required.
Yeah.
With the amount of brain drain we have at the moment, how do we tackle the lack of skilled professionals? I understand the political will. We're not going to change that. We can change what we can change. How do we tackle the lack of skilled professionals? And is that a misnomer? Do we have the people on the ground that can do this to enable a smart city within South Africa? And Kevin, straight afterwards, I'd like you to answer exactly the same question.
Okay. I think we do have the skill sets in South Africa for sure. I think what is desperately needed is the development of additional skills within a smart city environment, right? So in other words, have a look at your technicians, the guys that do the physical water management, that look after the maintenance, the infrastructure side, the electricity, the power. For sure, we've got the skill. What I would suggest we do is instead of reinventing the wheel, we should go to countries where they've deployed this successfully over a period of time. For instance, Singapore as an example. And go and identify the need to haves in our environment and take it and make it South African, in that sense.
Kevin, do we have the right skills to do this?
Yes, I think, South Africa has great skills in the country to be able to do this. We have, individuals, we have independents, we have consulting companies, we have the OEMs that have the technology from a technology. So it's a combination of the hardware and the soft skills. And I think we have that in South Africa. Yes, there is people also looking at leaving the country for various reasons. But I definitely think that if we embark on these and we bring the right people, we focus on the right things, people will be interested in doing this. And I think the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the paper that's been done, the committee, I think that's the step in the right direction. But I think the speed at which we do it needs to be done faster.
My mother used to say, a clever man learns from his mistakes, a wise man learns from someone else's. How do we as Africa and South Africa leapfrog Europe? Can we build smart cities on our aging infrastructure, our water, electricity, security, which are like the bedrock for an economy? We know they're under strain. And if anybody doubts that, I'm on level 4 and I'm using a Jenny. So please don't tell me we're not under strain. There's stuff going on here. Can we take this as the foundation and still hope to achieve smart cities? Give me hope, Rian.
We can. And I have to stress this. We have to. It's as simple as that. The challenge we're sitting with today is, I think within the metros, we are sitting with a lack of skill. We are sitting with, and we all know this, guys, we're sitting with a lot of underhanded dealings, tenders that cost 3-4 times they should. So we need to get back to fiscal discipline within the councils. And with the public-private partnership, I believe this can be done.
Okay.
The infrastructure, to give you a simple idea, in a city like City of Johannesburg, if we simply have a look at the waste management and we introduce IoT services in the City of Johannesburg, IoT services that they've got real-time visibility of when the waste bins are full, and based on that information, they schedule the actual routes on a dynamic basis, right? The cost saving to the council just by doing that, 25% cost saving. That's immense. because
immense.
I now don't have a fixed route that I do every single day. So on Monday, I'm in 4 ways, and then Tuesday, I'm here, etc. You use the information as it's presented because it's live and dynamic, and you schedule based on that. And the cost saving was 25% purely on the waste management component. So imagine what we can do with water and with electricity and with traffic management. It's immense.
So Rian, where I live down the road from a place called Stain City, and it's got the name of Stain City. Kevin, is that a smart city in my backyard?
Yes, it is. I think if you look at it, firstly, they've brought in, if you look at the different services, that's what they're doing. They're creating a city on its own. They're bringing in all those various services into that area, and they're using technology and innovation of how they've created this. So that's one element. But the sad part is that's restricted for the privileged. It's the minority of people in South Africa that can actually afford to live in Stain City. And, the question to a lot of people is, there's a lot of people still battling with basic services. And we got Stain City, which is obviously vast apart, showing exactly what is possible. The question is, how do we take, obviously not that extravagance, which is what Stain City is, but how do we take elements of what's happening there? And Rian mentioned what's happening in Waterfall. How do we take elements of that and start applying this to the rest of the country in smaller pockets? So rather than going and trying to do everything at once, we do it in small bite chunks, get it right, learn from it, and evolve at a quicker pace to be able to do that.
Yeah. So we need to aspire to be the best. So how do we get that partnership? And that's not a discussion today. So this is one of those host questions which shouldn't be asked, but how do we get the community to be the community as opposed to Stain City and Diepsloot being two different cities would be something. How do they benefit both? And it's not just paid by Stain City for Diepsloot's benefit. It's how do we all benefit from it? Part of our, I don't want to bring church into it, but a sermon on Sunday was about breaking the walls, not building them. Building bridges, not walls around us is the tenements of anyone's faith. And when we think of smart cities and why it was such a topic I really wanted to take on is because that's what you're giving us the opportunity to do. Between CommScope and Deloitte and other partners, we are building these environments, we're building bridges for everybody to improve. And we got a question from Davi who's talking around the public is concerned about invasion of privacy because one of the tenements of smart city is security, monitoring, and all the rest. And he's saying it's almost like we're constantly being monitored by Big Brother. How do we alleviate those fears and concerns? Davi, just again, I'm not meant to answer as I'm the host, but people want to be safe. They don't mind being watched. If you're going to have a response around it, would be my answer. But I want Rian to answer that one. And then I've got one from Nkuli Bogopa, who I'm going to ask for Kevin afterwards.
Yeah. So I think, David, to answer your question, firstly, we do have a very robust legislative arm that helps us here in the sense, the POPI Act. So there's certain things we can and cannot do. What I need to stress is, or maybe just to kind of, you're asking the Big Brother question. If you've got a cell phone today, right, and you've signed the RICA document to get access to your SIM card that you use in the phone, you effectively, Big Brother's watching. It's 100% guaranteed, right? So it is a case of the council or the metro or the smart cities are not using that information. And of course, there will be security systems in place to manage this, but there's no interest in having an information of what's Davi doing today, right? The important bit of information is trying to understand patterns of behavior of the populace of the smart city, because having visibility of the behavior, we can start proactively planning and improving the environment they live and function and work in, right? So security will always remain top priority, right? No one is ever safe. There can potentially be breaches. But again, I think you should see this as it's a sharing of information for the betterment of that environment. Simple example that I can use again, by using information of the citizens, frequenting a specific busy street at, let's say, 7 o'clock at night. those IoT sensors are clever enough to identify that, okay, hang on, the traffic volume, the amount of people that's frequenting that street is taking, it's toning down from, let's say, 9 o'clock at night. What you could do is you can tone down the street lights intensity at that time of night because you don't need all of that electricity. So again, security is a major concern, right? But again, it is for the betterment of the total populace in that environment, for everyone there. So
Thank you, Rian. I love that answer. And I'm just on the Poppy side. Poppy's got nothing to do with video surveillance monitoring. It's only for personal information. So just leave that one out of it. Nkuli has asked Kevin, does Deloitte, I added that in, have a 3D city model so we can start planning accordingly? Because when I see some of the cities that are building, I think, nobody's got any model out there. It's back of an envelope. Come on. Do we have a 3D model out there? Are we using them? Has Deloitte put down models for it? Is CommScope talking around these things? How is that happening today?
I stand corrected, but I don't think there is one that exists for the entire city.
City of Joburg or Cape Town or Durban or wherever.
Yeah, I don't think.
You shaking your head?
I can always check and share this thing, but I don't think there is one that exists. But I think that's a good idea. But remember, what we also do is we are a consulting professional services company, so we actually do work for clients. So if a client does approach us and say to us, this is what we would like to do, then, we obviously invest and put the time and energy and the effort into that to do that. So that's how we normally work. We're always open to collaboration. Obviously, there's a stringent process of companies that we participate with. It goes through a BRMS process. But subject to that, if you got any bright ideas and you want to see whether there's opportunities where we can collaborate, more than happy for you to contact me. I'll put you in the process. If all the governance is fine, then there's opportunities to there. I think that's the future of where the world is going. Is collaborating, sharing, working together, and there's governance around it. But definitely.
Kevin, you and I think alike. What my answer in the chat was, if there isn't one, build it and sell it to everybody. Come on, Rian, is there one? Hey.
No, Dan. So my comment is there's no cookie cutter model in building a smart city, because every smart city will have their own unique pain points and pressure points they want to address, right? So no single environment will look the same. However, the base infrastructure or the base building blocks, when you start developing the macro view of a smart city, remains the same, right? And that comes back to what Kevin said, that is your base infrastructure, it is your soft infrastructure. But again, it happens on a macro scale. You can't start off on a micro scale because you simply won't be able to anticipate the development and growth of this infrastructure over time. We do a lot of consultancy with a number of councils globally. And again, this is a partnership. It is a long-term consultation process, but we've got the skill sets, we've got the technology sets in the different areas to address and to build this out. But it's a process. There's no cookie cutter.
Yeah. And Rian, I think, I'm not sure whether you mentioned it, but while we were talking the previous day, you mentioned Dubai as an example. Dubai, if you looked in the 1970s, they had 3 lanes on one side, 3 lanes on the other side. And now look at the city. You mentioned there was an old picture and a new picture where 100%. The lanes were still there. So what they did is somebody had foresight. Somebody thought about these kind of things. But if you take Nigeria, as you mentioned, Nigeria is 2 single roads or 2 very narrow roads that are available that it's difficult to do. So the thing is, part of this here, the building blocks are very similar, but how you apply the building blocks will depend on city to city, because it all depends on where the maturity is, what's in place, what's not in place, and how you do it. So similar process, similar structure, just applied differently depending on maturity of the city itself.
I really like that. And, and I traveled quite extensively into Africa and into Saudi and UAE, and you can just see the differences. And I want to remind you of what's happened in Ethiopia, where they were waiting a long time for their building infrastructure to take place, because they were building roads and they were building water, putting electricity. Now the buildings are going up quickly. So there's a lot behind that political will you're talking about. Now, gentlemen, we've got 10 minutes. I've got a positive comment from the chats and a negative comment from you. I'm going to hold on them. What I want to ask, Rian, what are you focused on for the next 6 months? What are you most excited about from a CommScope perspective? Where are you guys going with smart cities?
Yeah. Sorry, Daniel. I don't mean to be too dissing, but can we maybe spend 2 minutes on what's happening in Rwanda, Kigali, and Kenya?
Of course.
Before we get into that, because I think that's quite important. If you look at what's happening in Africa about this common treaty that's being signed and how do we reuse, so there's great opportunity there. Do you mind if I spend 2 minutes on that?
No, of course. You were coming next anyway, so you can use your 2 minutes however you want. So Rian, he's cut in for the dance first. I hope you don't mind.
No problem. So I think Rwanda is a great example of Africa, who's leading the world. And if you talk about it, they call smart cities an opportunity to how they contribute to what we call societal performance and infrastructure growth in evolving markets. So the two examples I'll talk very quickly is that they call it now Kigali, Rwanda, which is called the Silicon Valley of Africa. And part of this, they talk about smart infrastructure, sensors around the city that measure air quality, monitor the power grid safety, they detect water leaks, all those kind of things, right? Because remember, if you got a water shortage and you got a leak problem, don't you want to put some technology that detects the leak so you can minimize the leaks, get rid of the leaks so you have more water, right? So that's smart thinking, right? They talk about education, collaborating with renowned universities, offering talent from the whole continent to meet and learn and develop. So not that they're bringing the world to Rwanda, creating new jobs and driving the economy by what they call technology advances. And very much, as you know, Kigali is Rwanda's capital, right? It's the economic heart of what they're trying to leapfrog and what they're trying to do. So that's one good example that's happening in that part. I think the other one that's quite big is what they call Kwanza in Kenya. That's building a smart city from scratch. And again, they're building it from scratch where they're using the national data center that provides anything digital that the city requires. So you have government providing their Wi-Fi points all across the city. So those putting in the basics infrastructure. And that's how they're connecting people through Internet of Things. Then they're collecting and they're sharing data is the bigger driver for inclusivity and a smarter city. And I think what's important for this is it's an inherited infrastructure and social challenge that they're taking to make the most. I'm going to stop there in terms of interest of time. But that is something that's great because rather than just going to Singapore, Dubai, New York, where, they are much, they're advanced cities, let's look at Africa and let's learn from Africa.
Come on. I love that. Rian, what are you most excited about in the next 6 months for CommScope? What is your focus?
100%. So we are involved with a number of councils throughout South Africa already. And exciting for us is obviously, the adoption of IoT services across these metros. Traffic management, for instance. Having a look at introducing the smart analytics that we've developed. So in other words, that you can make, typically what the smart analytics will do is it gives you a baseline of the performance of your network and it identifies outliers proactively before it becomes a problem. So it gives the council an opportunity to start addressing potential problems before they become, significant problems in the networks. So I think, those are the two key focuses for us for next year. Obviously the connectivity component of it, and then making sure that you've got an overlay of analytics across that infrastructure so you can start making sense of, what's happening in my environment and how do we manage that proactively.
Well, as a citizen, I'm really excited to see how you make progress on that. I think it's in all of our interests that the technology is expanded. Kevin, a question for you before I go to Rian to wrap up. Tell me about why the sharing economy was so important to you in your book. And can you show us your book, buddy? Show us your book.
So that's the book, The Rise of the Sharing Economy. So I think firstly, I can read something to you. I just want to make a correction. I mentioned Taxify. Taxify was actually bought by Bolt. My apologies. Didi is another company that's come on board. So I think we talk about excess, right? Because everybody talks about, previously it was about ownership. Everybody wants to own something. But now it's no longer about ownership. It's about the experience. And the old question is you do not have to own something to experience it. A drill. You don't need a drill. You need a hole. You only need a drill when you need a hole, right? Same thing if you want a holiday home. Lots of people have gone and bought their holiday homes, but the cost of ownership and the burdens of ownership is just crazy. So what you're finding is we're moving into a world, what we call is access the alternative to ownership. And I'll read something very, very quickly to you, is we talk about in 2011, the sharing economy was dubbed by Times Magazine as one of the 10 ideas that will change the world. And it has been widely hailed as a major growth sector by sources ranging from Fortune Magazine to the World Economic Forum to former President Obama. The sharing economy is a new economic model that focuses on access to assets or resources instead of ownership. It has exploded in popularity over recent years and has disrupted a significant number of mature industries such as accommodation, automotive, and entertainment. The total value of the global sharing economy is estimated to grow from $14 billion in 2014 to $335 billion by 2025. With limited resources, the desire to become more environmentally conscious, the high cost of burdens of ownership, and a rapidly growing population, living increasingly in densely populated cities, which we just spoke about, consumers are faced with greater challenges and opportunities to fill their consumption needs. People are experiencing a significant value shift with a desire to reconnect with products and services in a more meaningful way, and are becoming more cost-conscious, environmentally conscious, and are prioritizing experience over ownership.
Kevin, where do we get your book?
So it's available on 10 platforms across the world. Amazon, Loot. It's available in all exclusive books already. I am doing a formal launch on the 17th of November at the exclusive books in Santon. And Brilliant. I will be at Gibbs Business School as well.
Please pop it in the chat, just the title of the book, just for all of our attendees. And then, Rian, for you, my last question before I tell you what Anonymous and Melindy said. Melindy said, we've got to address the concept of smart city versus smart communities. If we focus on cities, we're going to expand the digital divide. We're going to end up having people not participating. And I agree with you. There was no question there. I just wanted to highlight that. My last question to you, Rian, you've been a great guest. I just want to ask you, what question would you have liked me to have asked you before the end of today? And you've got 1 minute.
The question is, where do we see ourselves in the next 5 to 10 years in South Africa with regards to smart cities?
And your answer?
Again, guys, my view is very simple. We've got a good opportunity to leapfrog. So again, because we're in Africa, we do not necessarily have a lot of legacy technologies that we have to farm and get out of the systems. We can leapfrog technology. So we've got the opportunity to use the absolute latest in technology, deploy it. And in my mind, we've got probably 5 to 7 years to get ourselves in gear to be able to compete on a global scale, right? If we miss this boat from a digitization and, getting the connectivity to the community at large, we will miss the bus in being able to take part in the world economy. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is, right? So in my mind, it is critical that we get national government's involvement in this, and they need to make sure that there is public-private partnership. There's no negotiation here, guys. This is a must do. We can't walk away.
There's always a negotiation. It's just whether or not we're willing to take the. Absolutely. Rian, you've been a great guest. Thank you for being here. Kevin, you have pivoted even when I throw you curveballs. You've also been great. You haven't thrown anything at me under the table. I want to thank you guys for educating me on smart cities and for giving me hope in my city, the greatest city in the world, the city of Johannesburg. To the attendees, thank you for participating. Some good comments, some interesting ones, some ones. But that's what makes a city, is that we've all got our own opinions to be in, and we are all invested in this. Let's get it right. Over to you, Kerry.
Thanks, Dan. One of the things that really resonated with me over this conversation is there's nothing like South African ingenuity and our spirit and our Ubuntu. So let's just communicate and really work together quite hard on this so that we can definitely reap the benefits in a couple of years' time. So thank you again for attending today. I hope you found today's session insightful and that we answered some of your questions. Cheers, guys. Have an awesome day further. Stay safe, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.